Five Nights at Freddy's. Fazbear Frights. Number 10. Story 2. Sea Bunnies. Mott lingered at the edge of the arcade in Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria and contemplated why he still liked this place so much. Was it the decor, the food, the animatronics? No, the truth was that Freddy's, bright, loud, and always over the top, was just a fun place to be. He turned and surveyed the dining area stretching out from the arcade. Even the parents were having a good time. Technically, he should have been outgrowing this place, but Freddy's had a way of getting under the skin. Mott? Mott looked down at Rory, his spastic little brother. Can we get more tickets? Rory asked. I almost beat Ben at air hockey. I need a do-over. Mott reached out to ruffle Rory's bright red hair. Predictably, Rory, who recently turned 7 and was too grown up for things like hair ruffling, darted out of Mott's reach and said, Mott! Mott laughed and pulled a wad of dollar bills from his jeans pocket. Go beat the pants off him. Rory grinned, grabbed the money, and took off. On the stage that ran the length of Freddy's dining room, Freddy Fazbear and his cohorts, Bonnie and Chica, began a new song. A spinning disco ball overhead started spraying streams of yellow, red, green, and purple light all over the pizzeria. Mott tapped his foot and began singing along under his breath. Matt! A girl called out. He turned to look at the packed tables. A couple of 4- and 5-year-olds bumped into him as they went racing past. He smiled. How'd he run around non-stop like that when he was that age? If he had, he could understand his mom's claim that he was responsible for 90% of the wrinkles forming on his still young face. Over here! The girl called again. He saw a slender, pink-nailed hand waving from a table a few feet away. It was Teresa, one of the popular girls in his class. He grinned at her, glanced once to check on Rory, and then sauntered across Freddy's black and white checkered floor. Teresa shared a red cloth-covered pizza and soda-laden table with a man and a woman who had to be her parents. They all shared the same warm brown, almost amber eyes, although neither parent had Teresa's gorgeous smile. Her parents were turned away from her, talking animatedly with another couple at the next table. Matt had heard something about golf and the cost of airfare. Matt turned his attention to Teresa. Friendly, smart, and petite, Teresa was what his mom called a catch. Though they shared English and algebra classes, they hadn't talked much outside of class. Still, she always smiled at him in the hallways. Hey, Teresa. Hi, Matt. Are you here alone? Teresa gestured at the empty chair next to her, and Mott took it. A ponytailed server on roller skates zipped past with a fresh pizza. Aromas of tomato, basil, and cheese teased Mott's nose. His mouth watered. He hadn't eaten before he and Rory came here, figuring they'd get a pizza right away. But Rory had been obsessed with the game since they'd arrived, and they hadn't ordered anything yet. Mott was getting so hungry that even the sickly sweet blue frosted birthday cake that sat near the stage was starting to look good. No, he said. I'm here with my little brother. He's friends with the birthday boy. Same here. My little brother too. Which one is yours? Mott asked, mainly because he had no idea what else to say. Teresa pointed at a boy with dark curls dancing with a bunch of little kids up next to the stage. Yours? She said. He looked over at the arcade. Rory's bright hair made him easy to spot. He and Ben had left the air hockey table and were charging this way. Rory probably wanted more money for tokens. Wow, really? He doesn't look like you, Teresa said. Mott wasn't sure what to say to that, so he just shrugged. But she was right. Rory got his red hair from their mother. Mott had their dad's plain brown hair, thankfully. Rory, with tufts of red that refused to lie down properly on his head, his overlarge eyes and mouth, and his face full of freckles, was always going to be kind of goofy looking. Mott, on the other hand, had been getting girl stares long before he wanted to. When he turned 13 a few months before, he finally began to welcome all that attention. According to his mom, he was objectively good-looking. The components of this assessment apparently was naturally wavy hair, his hooded dark brown eyes, his strong chin, and his great teeth. In the last couple of months, he'd also shot up a few inches, and he'd started working out. His shoulders were getting broad. He was beginning to see what his mom saw. Apparently, girls like Teresa were seeing it too. "Don't let it go to your head," his mom had told him. "If you do, I'll ground you for the rest of your life." Smiling at the memory, he said to Teresa, "On a good day, I'll admit Rory looks like our mom. On a bad day, I'd tell him he was left on our doorstep by sea monkeys." Rory raced up to the table just in time to hear what Mott had said. "I was not!" he shouted. Then he stuck out his hand. "I want more tickets!" Mott sighed and dug in his pocket for a few more dollars. He'd have paid several $100s to make Rory go away so he could keep talking to Teresa. Rory took the money Mott held out and ran off without saying thank you. Teresa laughed, then made a face. "I hate sea monkeys." Mott laughed too. "Exactly, creepy little things." He winked. "The real ones, not my brother." Teresa shivered. "I know what you mean. The real ones are like centipedes with tentacles and tails." Freddy and his band segued into another cover of a popular song, this one with a rocking beat. Teresa scooted her chair closer to Mott. "This is a good song, don't you think?" Mott nodded. "I do, but I think I like this group's ballads better." He named another song by the same group who'd originally done this one. Teresa bounced in her seat. "Oh yeah? That's a really good one. You like ballads? I'm learning to play the guitar, and that's what I like to sing." "I'd love to hear you sing sometime," Mott said. Teresa beamed at him. They spent the next several minutes talking music, and Mott had pretty much forgotten where he was until he glanced up and saw Rory galloping over, bouncing off a couple other little kids and 2 tables as he came. He was grinning wildly, and he held up what looked like a new toy, something in bright-colored cardboard and plastic packaging. Rory was going so fast that when he got to the table, he plowed right into Mott and started to lose his balance. Mott grabbed his brother's arm and kept him upright. "Look what I got, Mott!" Rory half yelled, half screamed. He was only a few inches from Mott now, and Mott winced at the excessive decibel level. As he often did, he wished Rory had a volume control he could dial down. Rory's blaring announcement had gotten Teresa's and her parents' attention. They all smiled at Rory as Mott asked, with as much enthusiasm as you could muster, "What did you get?" Rory started waving around his treasure. He waved it so rapidly that Mott still couldn't tell what it was. He frowned, trying to read the words on the waving package. "Sea bunnies," Rory said. "I got sea bunnies! Look!" He kept waving the package. "I'm trying to look," Mott said. He reached out and snatched the package. Rory jumped up and down like it was on an invisible pogo stick. Mott focused on the package in his hand. Against a black checkered background, bright red letters announced that the package contained astounding live sea bunnies. Under the words, the image of a seriously disquieting little purplish-blue creature that appeared to be a cross between a sea monkey and a rabbit was encircled by a bright blue blob of what was probably supposed to be water. Next to the image, the package promised, "Contains everything you need to grow and nurture your own sea bunnies." Beneath that, plastic sheathing covered 4 packets, designed to start your own healthy colony of happy sea bunnies. There were 2 packets of sea bunny live eggs, one of sea bunny water purification powder, and one of sea bunny super duper growth food. At the bottom of the packaging, bright blue letters proclaimed, "Guaranteed to live for 3 years." Mott made a face and looked at Rory. "Really?" Rory was still hopping up and down. Now he giggled and shouted, You said sea monkeys left me on the doorstep. Not sea monkeys, sea bunnies! Rory let loose with one of his high-pitched laughs. He clearly thought he was hilarious. He spun in a gleeful circle. Now I can have some of my real brothers and sisters around. He laughed some more, quite pleased with himself. Mutt shook his head. He felt Teresa leaning in behind him, and he showed her the package. Ew, she said. He nodded in agreement. Rory plucked the package from Mutt's hand. They're awesome. Sure they are, Mutt said. As soon as Mutt and Rory got home, Rory darted into the kitchen to find their mother, who was tearing up lettuce for a salad. Beef stew simmered on the 6-burner Viking range that was his mom's pride and joy. She loved to cook. Rory showed his mom the Sea Bonnie's package and started talking non-stop as he climbed up onto one of the wood stools in front of the granite-covered island where she worked. Their mom set the lettuce aside and began chopping tomatoes and cucumbers for the salad. For one blissful moment, all Mutt could hear was the faint hum of the fan above the range, the intermittent tap of his mom's knife against the cutting board, and the delicious stew bubbling. But then Rory started jabbering, and all Mutt could hear was his chatterbox of a brother. Rory waved his Sea Bonnie's package under his mother's nose. She blinked at it, but kept working on the salad. Rory didn't seem to care. Sea bunnies are basically like sea monkeys, but they're genetically engineered to look like Bonnie. You know, Bonnie from Freddy's, Rory said. Mutt and his mother exchanged a smile at Rory's version of genetically engineered. Rory kept talking. They're super cool looking, and Fazbear Entertainment only came out within the last month. That's what Ben said. He usually buys all the new stuff, but his parents wouldn't let him get any sea bunnies because they said Pewter might eat them, and they didn't think that would be good for Pewter, and that wouldn't be good for the sea bunnies either. He giggled wildly. Mutt looked at his mom over the top of Rory's head. He shrugged. Wearing her usual stay-at-home clothes, black yoga pants, and a baggy white shirt, his mom brushed a strand of red hair from her blue eyes. She scratched her freckled nose and smiled. Pewter is the family cat, right? His mom said. Oh yeah, Rory said. Don't you think I should get a bigger fish tank now that Frisk is going to have friends? I mean, I know the small one fits on my desk, and the sea bunnies can help Fritz keep me company while I do homework and color and stuff. But if we got me a big tank with a stand, I could put it on the other side of the room, under the window. Oh no, wait. What if we got a huge one, and we put it in the living room? Oh no, wait. Then I wouldn't have them in my room. I think I want them in my room. Maybe I could get more, and we could get 2 tanks and... While Rory talked, and Mutt tried not to listen to him, their mom wiped her hands on a dish towel. She stepped over and gently put a hand over Rory's mouth. Take a breath, sweetie, she said. It's genetically engineered, Mutt said, in the blessed quiet that suddenly filled the kitchen. Not genetically engined. His mom gave him a look and shook her head. He rolled his eyes. She crossed the shiny wood floor to the stainless steel refrigerator and opened it to grab a bottle of salad dressing. Do sea bunnies have the same water temperature requirement that Fritz has? She asked. Rory said. Huh? May I see the package? Mutt asked Rory. Rory shrugged and handed it over. Mutt scanned the instructions on the back of the package. He frowned. Isn't it 74 degrees now? His mother nodded. The water needs to be 75 to 81 degrees for them to hatch. Then it can go back down. I wonder if cranking it up to, 78 or something will be okay for a goldfish for the 24 hours it takes to hatch the sea bunny eggs. Maybe you could research that after dinner, his mum said. Mutt shrugged. Sure, why not? That's what all the cool kids do on Saturday nights. She laughed. No, that's what the cool kids wish they were doing. Instead, they're going to boring things like movies and parties. I feel sorry for them, Mutt said. Rory, who had been examining his sea bunnies with great pride and joy, suddenly pointed at a spot on the package. What's that word? Mutt looked under his brother's dirty index finger. Colony. What's a colony? Mutt let his mom take that one. When she finished defining the word, Rory screwed up his face and announced, I want an empire, not a colony. That's bigger, right? Maybe I should get another package of them. One package is enough, his mom told him. Rory squinted and took a deep breath, in clear preparation for a loud rebellion. Mutt spoke quickly. You can call it whatever you want, you know. Rory tilted his head. I can? Absolutely, Mutt and his mom said in unison. After dinner, and after determining that Fritz wouldn't be harmed by a day or so of 78-degree water, Mutt helped Rory get his tank set up for the seed bunnies. Rory's tank was small, maybe 16 inches by 10 inches or so. It held 5 gallons, more water than Fritz needed. But Mutt thought Fritz always looked content in his domain. Mutt idly wondered what Fritz would think about the soon-to-be interlopers. Did the fish think? Lifting the tank's lid and waiting while Rory said hello to Fritz, Mutt opened the sea bunny packaging. Okay, the first step, he told Rory, is to put this in. He handed Rory the packet of water purifier. At Rory's insistence, he read the ingredients. Salt, some kind of water conditioner, and some brine shrimp eggs. That's all we can do today, Mutt told a frustrated Rory when his little brother wanted to dump all the other packets in, too. The instructions say to wait 24 hours. Then we'll put in the eggs. Those will be the genetically engineered eggs. Why do we have to wait? Rory scowled. Mutt shrugged. Because the packaging says so. He didn't bother telling Rory that the whole process was weird. He read the contents of the eggs packet, and he was surprised to see it also contained yeast, borax, soda, salt, and blue dye. What about this? Rory asked, holding up the food packet. Mutt referred to the instructions. That goes in after the eggs hatch. The food packet contained more yeast and some spirulina. It would have to be added every few days. Because Mutt didn't trust Rory not to dump everything in the tank at once, he'd take the packets when he left Rory's room. Rory protested, but when he started to throw a tantrum, their mom appeared to smooth things over. Mutt felt bad that she had to intervene. Their dad was a commercial airline pilot who was often away, which meant Mom had to run the house and do most everything at home. She also worked full-time at an event planning firm and was trying to start her own company in her spare time, of which she had little. To compound matters, most of the events she planned happened in the evening, and she had to be there to oversee them. Mutt wasn't sure when his mom slept, and even with all that, she never acted annoyed when he was interrupted. Mom, Mutt said, I'll get him ready for bed. Go rest. Sure? She asked. Sure. You're a good son, his mom said. I know, he laughed. With just a little wheedling, Mutt got Rory into the bathroom to brush his teeth. While he brushed, Rory chatted about school and his friends, and the new puppy that Danny and his family had gotten a couple weeks before. Toothpaste shot all over the place as Rory talked. Used to this routine, Mutt wiped down the counter and the floor. Eventually, Rory spit the remainder of his toothpaste into the sink. Mutt used a wet washcloth to wipe Rory's face. Rory wriggled out of his reach. I want a puppy, Rory said. When's Dad coming home? He's doing non-stops this week, Mutt said. He'd opted for answering the second question first. It was easier. I think he'll be home for a few days next week. Maybe he'll get us a puppy while he's home, Rory said. Maybe Mom will get us a puppy while you demonstrate a little responsibility. Rory twisted his lips in concentration. How do I do that? Mutt considered what he could get away with. Well, maybe if you cleaned up your room, didn't yell so much, and stopped interrupting me and Mom whenever... Rory shouted. No! I know what I can do! Shh! Rory lowered his voice to just above normal volume. I can help Danny and Dap-Up. Dap-Up? Mutt repeated. That's the puppy's name. His dad kept asking, where's Dap Puppy? and his mom said they might as well call him that. His whole name is Puppy, but they call him Pup. Danny likes to follow Pup around and say over and over, "What's that, Pup?" Rory giggled gleefully. Mott laughed. He couldn't help it. Rory was a lot of annoying things, but he was also entertaining as all get out. Apparently, so were Danny and his family. "Okay," Mott said. "Let's get into bed." Following Rory into his room, Mott shut Rory's bedroom door so Rory's jibber-jabber didn't bother their mother. "Now Danny's bugging his parents for a kitten," Rory went on. "He wants to name it Dat Cat or Dat Kitten." Rory launched himself toward his bed, spun in mid-air, and landed on his back. He kicked his legs in the air like an upturned beetle and let out another trill of giggles. "Where are your PJs, Goofus?" Mott asked. Rory sat up, his eyes dancing. He grabbed his pillow. "Under the bed, Doofus." Mott bent over to look under the bed, and a pillow hit him in the side of the head. He rose to find Rory looking at the ceiling and whistling. Mott glanced around, as if searching for something. A pillow just hit me in the head. I wonder where it came from." Rory giggled. "Did it come from under the bed?" Mott asked. He stuck his head under the bed and spotted green and yellow dinosaur patterned PJs. As he reached for them, another pillow struck his shoulders. Mott whipped his head out from under the bed and jumped to his feet, feigning shock and outrage. He dropped the PJs on the bed. "Another one? Is there an invisible pillow thrower in the room?" He whirled in a circle, wearing a fierce expression as Rory giggled louder. "Show yourself, you pillow-throwing milksop!" Mott leaned over and picked up the thrown pillows. "I'll beat you in a fair fight if you have the metal." He struck a warrior pose, both pillows raised. Rory, struggling against a rising tide of giggles, shouted, "What's a milksop, and why does he need metal?" Mott cocked his head. "Hark! Methinks these questions are misdirect." He glowered at Rory. "Dost thou do the pillow thrower's bidding, young lad? Are thee in cahoots with the namby-pamby?" Rory laughed so hard he snorted. He reached for the only remaining pillow on the bed. Mott turned his back to Rory and pretended to look for the pillow thrower again. The third pillow hit him in the back. "Outrageous!" he bellowed, leaning to pick up the latest pillow. He rotated to face Rory. "I have no choice but to unleash my retaliation upon thine own countenance, young minion of the invisible pillow thrower." Making sure he didn't throw it too hard, Mott fired all 3 pillows at Rory, who dove under the covers, squealing and laughing. Mott fell on him and started tickling him. Rory shrieked and laughed louder. "Dost thou surrender?" Mott asked. Rory gasped. "Yes, yes!" His breath smelled like his peppermint toothpaste. Mott stopped tickling his brother. Rory, his face flushed, his eyes wet with happy tears, grinned up at Mott. "You didn't answer my question." Mott reached for the PJs, which had landed on the floor again during the roughhousing. "What? Oh, you mean milksop and metal?" Rory nodded. Mott handed Rory his PJs. "Put these on. A milksop is someone who is indecisive or doesn't have courage. It comes from how little kids used to stop up milk with their bread." Rory frowned, then nodded. "I like that word." "And it's M-E-T-T-L-E, not M-E-T-A-L, Mott said, as Rory pulled on his PJ top. "Metal." He felt it again. "Means the ability to cope with the difficulties. Someone who can bounce back from an attack easily." Rory exchanged his jeans for his PJ pants. "That's another good word." "I agree," Mott said. "Let's get you under the covers." Rory yawned and crawled under the covers, head first. Mott rolled his eyes. "Turn around, Goofus." Rory giggled from under the covers. He rotated, and his tousled head appeared. "What's namby-pamby?" Mott helped Rory get situated in bed. "It's another word for milksop, but it also means someone without much strength." "I'm not a namby-pamby or a milksop," Rory said. "No, you aren't," Mott agreed. Mott got home late on Monday evening. He and his 2 best friends, Nate and Lyle, had to work on a science project, and they'd met at Nate's house to work on it. Nate's dad, Dr. Tabor, aka Dr. T, was a pediatrician who had been Mott's doctor since Mott was a baby. Nate and Mott had become friends because they met at Dr. Tabor's office when they were about 2. Dr. T's wife, an engineer, had an important meeting that day, so Dr. T had brought his son to work with him. Nate and Mott had taken over the blocks in the waiting room play area, building an impressive fort that none of the other kids in the waiting room were allowed to touch. Dr. T had told Mott's mom that the boys' friendship clearly was meant to be, and suggested the parents get together for dinner while the kids had a play date. Or at least that's what Mott's mom had told him. He didn't remember any of it. All he knew was that his parents were good friends with Nate's parents, and he was good friends with Nate. His earliest memory of Nate was the two of them trying to climb up on a counter to steal freshly baked cookies. They'd both ended up in Dr. T's office with contusions and mild burns from the hot cookie sheets. Not that Mott remembered that either. He just remembered the chair ladder they'd built, and he remembered a lot of pain. Over the years, Dr. T had become like a dad to Mott. Dr. T believed that work and home life should be properly balanced, so he opened his clinic near the neighborhood, close to the end of the green belt that ran past the back of Mott's house. Dr. T started work really early, but he never worked late, never worked weekends, and was always ready and willing to play or help with school. Tonight he was helping the boys get started on that science project, which was a study of the effects of antibiotics on microorganisms. Having access to a doctor came in handy. Dr. T had gotten a small amount of 4 types of antibiotics: penicillin, streptomycin, aromycin, and terramycin. He'd also gotten a syringe, a petri dish, flasks, and beakers, and some pipettes. Mott and his friends had been tasked with getting everything else they'd need: a potato, agar, dextrose, distilled water, garden soil, and pens that would write on glass. When they'd complain about the agar and dextrose, "What in the heck are those?" Nate had asked his dad. Dr. T had gotten them too. Dr. T and Nate had already done 99% of the experiment. Lyle was bored out of his mind and mostly tried to make music with the pipettes and the beakers. Mott wasn't bored, but he was puzzled by the complex process. What with this being heated and that being mixed in? Thanks to Dr. T, he did eventually understand what they were doing, and was looking forward to seeing what microorganism colonies grew in the petri dishes they set next to the heat register in Nate's house. They had bets going on which antibiotics would keep the colonies from growing. 2 cheeseburgers and a milkshake on penicillin, Nate said. "I'll take that bet," Lyle said. "If we throw in a couple large fries. How about you, Mott?" "I'm with Nate," Mott said. Lyle rolled his eyes. "Well, then if you're wrong, it had better be 2 milkshakes." "You're going down," Nate said. Mott laughed with his friends and said goodnight. He biked home a little after 9, when it was dark. When he pulled his bike into the garage, Rory met him at the door leading into the kitchen, flailing around in excitement. "Come look! Come look!" Mott followed his exuberant brother up the stairs and down the long hallway, pausing only to drop his backpack in his own room. When they went into Rory's room, he pointed and stomped back and forth in front of his desk, as if performing a ceremonial dance on the strewn clothes and toys all over his blue, shag-rug-covered floor. "Look!" he shouted. Mott stepped over a plastic cement truck, a cardboard castle, and 2 spaceship models to stand before Rory's fish tank, which sat on Rory's desk, surrounded by a clutter of school books, coloring books, puzzles, and crayons. Even partially hidden by all the piles, it was clear that the tank no longer contained just water and Fritz. It was now filled with tiny, wriggling shapes. Mott leaned over to get a better look. He immediately wished he hadn't. Straightening, Mott rubbed away the goosebumps that had just erupted all over his forearms. "Oh, this is just wrong." "Aren't they great?" Rory asked. Mott rolled his eyes. You're a seriously weird little kid. What are you, pot sea monster? He gulped loudly. Creep from the deep beyond? Rory stopped stomping in glee and turned to frown at Mott. What do you mean by that? Although he'd leaned away from the tank, Mott hadn't been able to pull his gaze from the disgusting things swimming around the goldfish in the tank. The sea bunnies had hatched. Dozens of them. No, make that hundreds. They looked like semi-translucent, fleshy, pale bluish-purple rabbits with tiny black eyes and almost microscopic fairy tentacles lining their bodies. From what Mott could tell, they appeared to propel themselves through the water using their misshapen rabbit ears. Rory tugged on the hem of Mott's brown polo shirt. Huh? Mott said.
Why do you say that? Why'd you say I'm pot sea monster?
Rory punched Mott's leg hard enough to make Mott grimace.
That was mean.
Ignoring his brother's upset, Mott pointed to the sea bunnies. You actually like these things? He asked. Rory turned to look at them. His het feelings forgotten, he grinned.
Sure, that's super coolio.
Mott crossed his arms. Rory, they're disgusting.
They are not.
Rory kicked out at Mott and barely missed Mott's skin.
That's not nice to say stuff like that. You're going to make them feel bad.
He reached out to the fish tank and stroked the glass like he was trying to soothe his mutant pets. Whatever, Mott scoffed. He started to turn away and leave the room, but an abrupt movement in the tank yanked his gaze back to the sea bunnies. He lifted his eyebrows. The sea bunnies had moved in a giant cluster to where Rory's hand had brushed against the side of the tank. Fritz still swam lazily at the far side of the tank, but the sea bunnies were all together near the glass under Rory's hand. It was like they were responding to his gesture. The goosebumps reappeared on Mott's arms. He shook his head, annoyed with himself for being unnerved by tiny, deviant brine shrimp. The movement must have been some kind of reflexive response to motion or shadow, he figured. He turned toward the door to Rory's room.
Apologize,
Rory said. Mott stopped and gave Rory a look. To you, or your swimming freaks there? Rory put both his fists on his skinny hips.
Both.
Mott laughed at his brother. A bubbling sound came from the fish tank, and Mott's attention returned to it. He blinked and stared. Although Fritz still floated toward the back of the tank, the sea bunnies had shifted so they were lined up in a disturbingly ordered formation, all on the front of the fish tank. He couldn't tell for sure because they were so small, but from where he stood, it looked to Mott like all the sea bunnies were facing forward, looking at him. Mott swallowed hard and took a step back. Obviously, the sea bunnies wasn't any sort of formation, and they weren't looking at him. That wasn't possible.
Matt, say you're sorry!
Rory yelled.
What's going on in here?
Mott turned to see his mom standing in the doorway of Rory's room. She had a blue laundry basket full of folded clothes, propped against her waist. Rory charged over to her and threw his bony arms around her thighs. He spewed out his grievance so fast that all his words bunched up together.
Mott called me a sea monster, and he insulted my sea bunnies. He said they were disgusting. He was mean. He won't apologize.
Mott's mom used her free hand to pat Rory's shoulder. She looked at Mott over the top of Rory's head and raised one eyebrow. Mott knew that look. It said, "You're not wrong, but can you humor your little brother?" He sighed and nodded. Rory sniffed and turned to frown at Mott. Mott squatted to look Rory in the eye. I am very sorry I insulted you and your friends. I was just kidding, but I shouldn't have kidded you that way. He noticed that Rory had a smudge of chocolate at the corner of his pouty lips and several blonde crumbs on the front of his green and blue striped shirt. His breath smelled like the chocolate chip cookie he'd clearly snuck from the kitchen. Mott reached out and cleaned up both crumbs and chocolate with his thumb. Rory squirmed away and said, begrudgingly,
It's okay.
Mott glanced at the sea bunnies. He realized that he was checking them because he wanted to see if his apology had modified them any more than it had his brother. They were swimming around in the tank exactly as you'd expect sea monkey-like creatures to do. He must have imagined the earlier behavior. But why would he have done that? Was he that freaked out by the abnormal little creatures? He rotated back to his mother. "Can I help you with any of that?" He waved a hand at the laundry basket. She flashed him a smile.
"I've got it. Go ahead. I assume you only worked on science at NACE, right?"
Mott nodded. She was right. He still had more homework to do. Mott started to leave the room, but he hesitated when he heard his name being whispered. He looked back at his mom, who was tucking socks into one of the drawers in Rory's dresser. "Did you say something?" he asked her. She looked over at him. "Nope." He stepped into the hallway, and he heard it again. A whisper. "Mott." And more. This time he also heard, "Scaredy cat." He whirled and glared at Rory. "What did you just call me?" Both Rory and their mom widened their eyes at Mott. "What in the world, Mott?" He frowned. "Rory didn't just—"
"I'm not doing anything wrong,"
Rory said. "Anything wrong?" His mom said automatically. To Mott, she said, "What did you think you had?" He shook his head. He had to have been imagining things. Suddenly he realized that the whisper he'd heard hadn't been either his mother's or his brother's voice. And come to think of it, the whisper hadn't been a single whisper. It had sounded like several whisper tones coming in unison, mostly together, but just slightly off, resulting in a faint echo. It couldn't be. He glanced at the fish tank. The sea bunnies were swimming around aimlessly until he looked. Then they suddenly swam to the end of the tank, as a unit. They all looked through the glass at him. He opened his mouth to ask his mum if she was seeing what he was seeing, and he immediately realized what a bad idea that was. Pulled together, their brains aren't large enough to understand complex speech, let alone generate it. Instead, he returned to his room. Clearly, he needed some sleep. After closing his door, Matt stared at the knob for an uncomfortable moment. He locked it. The next morning, Rory was in a dither because he couldn't find his lucky striped socks, which he had to wear because he and his best friend, Danny, were going to have a swing-off during recess. "And this is more important than me preparing my algebra quiz," Mott muttered as he pawed through Rory's drawers in frustration. Not to mention getting to talk to Teresa before class, he thought. He had a whispered response to his internal dialogue. "As if a girl would pay attention to you." Mott whipped his head toward Rory, but Rory wasn't even in the room. Mott was in here alone. Or not. He turned toward the fish tank. Sure enough, the sea bunnies were all clustered at the end nearest to Mott. They were watching him again. Before he knew what he was doing, he spat back. "You're just glorified fish bait." Rory ran into the room.
"What'd you say?"
He held up one of his striped socks.
"This was in the hamper. I don't know where the other one is, though."
Ungluing his eyes from the fish tank, Mutt noticed his heart rate had picked up. He swallowed and said, very slowly and very calmly, "Why don't you go check Mum's room? Maybe your socks got mixed up with hers by mistake. When I'm done looking in here, I'll check my socks."
"Okay."
Rory scampered out of the room. Mutt looked at the sea bunnies, and he flinched. The water in the fish tank was choppy. He could hear it sloshing, and he could see bubbles shooting up through the middle of the tank. The sea bunnies were agitating as a group, as if they were. Mutt strode out of Rory's room, and he ran right into Rory.
"Ew!"
Rory grunted loudly. He bounced off Mutt and grinned.
"Look!"
He held up a pair of striped socks, not his own, but similar in color.
"Mom's letting me wear her lucky socks. She says they're even luckier than mine."
Mutt tried to talk, but couldn't. He was too busy processing what he'd just seen. Rory didn't seem to notice. He went around Mutt and dropped to the floor to put on his mother's socks. Mutt's head was suddenly throbbing. He rubbed his temple. Could simple organisms like sea bunnies even get angry? Because that was what it had looked like and Rory's tank. It had looked like the sea bunnies were reacting to his insult, and before that, it had sounded like they had been taunting him again. Mott? Mott blinked and saw his mother standing just outside his parents' room. She wore a beige suit, and her long red hair was in a French braid.
Why are you standing in the hall? She asked. Are you all right?
Mott frowned. He opened his mouth, but he still couldn't talk. His mouth was horribly dry. His mom put a hand against his forehead.
You feel warm. Are you coming down with something? Do you want to stay home from school?
No! Ah, that was his voice. His mom raised her eyebrows.
Okay. Whoa. I must have the weirdest scene in recorded history. I gave him a chance to skip school, and he jumps down my throat.
Mott coughed and moistened his teeth with his tongue. Sorry, Mom. I didn't mean to snap at you. It's just that his mom's phone rang, and she raised a finger. Thankful for the reprieve, Mott went into his room to get his backpack. Rory thundered in behind him.
I'm going to take Daddy down, he announced.
He flexed non-existent muscles and puffed his cheeks. Mott turned Rory around and gave him a gentle push out into the hallway. His mom got off the phone and looked at her sons.
Are we ready?
Let's get out of here, Mott said. He winced at his mom's strange look. Let's go. Mott was in no hurry to get home that afternoon, but he couldn't come up with a decent excuse to be late. His mom had asked him to bike over to the grade school and escort Rory home, and she'd asked him to look after Rory until she got home later that evening. He promised he would do that. If he broke his promise, it would mess up her work. Mott had hoped that when he got home, he could get Rory to play outside, but rain started coming down on the way home, and it was steady by the time they put their bikes away. Go get dried off, Mott said to Rory. Then go into my room and I'll help you with your homework.
No, you come to my room, Rory said. I am supposed to write a poem about something I have that I like a lot. I'm going to write about my sea bunnies. You have to help me.
Oh, joy, Mott said. Mott was a little unnerved to notice that his hands were shaking when he left his backpack in his room. Really? He was afraid of tiny squirming sea critters confined to a glorified fishbowl? Get a grip, he breathed as he went down the hall into Rory's room. Rory sat at his desk, a piece of paper in front of him, a pencil grasped tightly in his right hand. He was staring rapidly at his sea bunnies. Mott eyed the tank warily. For a few seconds after his gaze landed on the sea bunnies, they swam around normally. Then, as if they realized he was in the room, they suddenly shot to the end of the tank and lined up in formation. Hundreds of pinhead-sized black eyes appeared to be focused directly on him. Rory!
What?
Rory's gaze didn't leave the tank. Do you see what they're doing? Mott asked.
Huh?
Rory looked over at Mott. The sea bunnies. See how they're all lined up? Rory looked at the sea bunnies. They were milling about separately. Mott felt a growl-like sound rise up in his throat. The little monsters! They were messing with him. You're so easy to mess with. A chorus of whispers tickled his ears. Mott clamped his hands over his ears and started humming. He wasn't sure how long he stood there humming. Probably not long. Rory was capable of sitting still for only a nanosecond or so. He couldn't have been waiting at his desk for long before he started yanking on Mott's shirt. Mott opened his eyes and looked at his brother. What, Rory?
What's a word that rhymes with love?
Above dove. Mott chewed the inside of his cheek. That's all I can think of right now. Above wax. Stupid. The whispers came again. I need to go to the bathroom, Mott told Rory. Stand here and behave. When I'm done with your poem, come and get me my room. But, Rory began. Mott didn't wait. He bolted down the hall and escaped into the bathroom. He wasn't sure how long he remained in the small white-tiled room. He didn't need to use the toilet, so he sat on the edge of the tub and stared at the fish-patterned blue and white wallpaper. He shivered. Was it fish in general that were waiting him out now? He gazed at the wallpaper. Would the blue fish whisper at him too? He waited. Nope. No whispers. That was because the sounds weren't in his head, or at least they weren't being manufactured in his head. The sounds were coming from the sea bunnies. He was sure of it.
Matt!
Rory shouted through the door. He pounded on the door so hard it rattled in its frame.
I'm ready!
Mott sighed and stood. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door.
Come look!
Rory said. He motioned for Mott to follow him back to his bedroom. I said you can read it in my room, Mott said. Rory turned and shook his head.
No! You have to come see this. It's super duper coolio.
Mott swallowed and accompanied Rory. In Rory's room, Rory walked over to the fish tank and began reading.
When I saw my sea bunnies, I fell in love. It was like a gift from Freddy above. They're super cool, and they make me glad. I like that 'cause I hate being sad.
Rory pointed to the sea bunnies and looked over at Mott with a face shining with happiness.
See? He said. They like it!
Mott made himself look in the tank. Oh, man. As much as the sea bunnies seemed to dislike Mott, they appeared to love Rory. They were all in formation again, lined up at the glass in front of Mott's little brother. The little see-through tails were shimmying in unison. Well, at least the revolting little monsters are nice to my brother, Mott thought. It's a good poem, Mott said to Rory. Rory turned a beam at him. Behind Rory, the sea bunnies darted, as one, to the end of the aquarium, and they all focused on Mott. Or again, it looked like they did. Or again, it looked like they did. Do you want to go play my video game with me? Mott asked Rory.
Really? Sure!
Rory ran toward Mott, his sea bunnies and his poem momentarily forgotten. Mott hummed as he and Rory trotted toward the stairs. Behind him, whispers reached for his ears, but he hummed louder and refused to listen. Mott managed to avoid his brother's room for the rest of the evening. When his mother got home, he told her Rory had been restless, so Mott hadn't had time to do his homework. She took over Rory duty, and Mott retreated to his room. Because, distressingly, he could still hear the faintest of whispers in his own room, he put in his earbuds and listened to music while he studied. He kept in the earbuds while he got ready for bed, taking them out only for a couple of minutes to say goodnight to his mom. Then he went to bed wearing the earbuds. When he got up the next morning, he went from earbuds to shower to earbuds to out the door. He avoided breakfast by telling his mom he had to get to school early to meet with Nate and Lyle so they could talk about an upcoming history project. The truth was, the history project was weeks away, but he figured a lie in the interest of remaining sane was a lie worth telling. Over lunch, sitting with his friends, eating his cheese sandwich, he thought about telling them what was going on, but he knew his friends. They didn't share more than one serious bone between them. Mostly, they were one big laugh fest. There was no way they'd do anything but make fun of Mott if he told them what he thought about the sea bunnies. After algebra that afternoon, he briefly considered telling Teresa about his experience with the sea bunnies. He knew she was as grossed out by them as he was, so she might be inclined to believe him. But,
maybe next weekend?
She asked him. Mott realized he'd missed all of whatever she just told him. I am so sorry, he said. My head was someplace else. Teresa laughed.
I do that all the time. I said we're going camping this weekend, but I was wondering if you'd like to get together next weekend and study. I'm having trouble with two variable linear equations. You seem to be getting it. I was hoping you could help me.
She looked really pretty today. Her shiny hair was caught back, and a yellow scarf that matched her short dress. Mott grinned. Sure! He'd help her shovel manure if she asked. He didn't think telling a pretty girl that you think tiny mutant brine shrimp were whispering to you was a good way to impress her. He kept his fears to himself. If only he could stay away from home. But he couldn't. His mom was used to him enjoying being at home. He spent most of his afternoons with Rory and most of his evenings with his mom, when she wasn't at an event. She would find it bizarre if he suddenly wanted to stay over with Nate or Lyle, and his friends would too. He'd just have to avoid Rory's room. This plan worked for much of the evening. He got Rory involved in another video game in the living room. Then he suggested they all play a board game after dinner. When the game concluded, Mutt started to tell his mom he had a headache. Unfortunately, she beat him to it. "Can you get Rory ready for bed, Mutt?" His mom held a palm to the side of her head.
"I have a tension headache, and I need to lie down."
Mutt's reluctance must have shown on his face. She frowned when she looked at him and said,
"I'll give you an extra allowance this week."
Mutt shook his head. "Forget that. It's okay. Sorry. I was just... Never mind. Of course. I'll get him into bed."
"Let's read Foxy and Barney on the High Seas!"
Rory shouted. Mutt's mom drew away from the sound and headed out of the room. "Dial it down, buddy," Mutt said. "Mom has a headache."
"Oh."
Rory turned to watch that mom go up the stairs.
"Sorry, Mom,"
he yelled. Mutt shook his head and ruffled Rory's hair. Rory admitted his multi-syllabic Mutt and galloped up the stairs. Mutt turned off all the lights, checked the doors were locked, and the security system was on, and then he followed his brother up to the second floor. Along 20 minutes later, Mutt had Rory settled and in bed. "You need to get to sleep," Mutt told his brother. He handed Rory the plush Freddy Fazbear he liked to sleep with.
"Nope,"
Rory said.
"Read."
He clutched Freddy and pointed to his nightstand. The book he'd referred to earlier was lying under a rolled-up comic book, a slingshot, and a half-empty package of gum. "Yeah, read," the whispers commanded. Mutt ground his teeth, but he reached for the book. He knew better than to try to leave Rory's room without reading to him. Rory was quite capable of pitching an ear-splitting fit, and if he did that, it would delay Mutt's exit from the room even longer. So, he reached for the book and pulled it out, sending the slingshot and the gum to the floor. He didn't bother to pick them up. He just started reading where he'd last left off. He read fast, and he read loudly, but Rory didn't seem to care. He'd listened rampantly for several minutes, and then his eyes began to droop. Mutt kept reading loudly. He was almost shouting. Just as he had been with all his silly antics earlier, he was trying to drown out the whispers. Thankfully, Rory could sleep through a hurricane. He burrowed down under the covers, tucked Freddy under his chin, and closed his eyes tightly. In seconds, Mutt could hear Rory's little kid snores, even over the shouted reading. Mutt stopped reading, laid the book on the nightstand, and stood all in one motion. He was ready to get out of here. He turned off the wagon wheel lamp on the nightstand, but the room didn't go dark. Rory had a nightlight plugged in near his door, and the fish tank had a light, which was still on. Mutt turned and prepared to sprint out of the room. "Namby-pamby, namby-pamby," the whispers taunted. Mutt froze, feeling like he couldn't back down from a challenge made by something as small as a sea bunny. He turned to glare at the hideous things. Expecting to see them glaring back at him, he was surprised to find them all clustered together near the back of the tank. He started to walk by, but then he did a double take. They weren't just clustered together. They were clustered together around Fritz. They were attacking him. Mutt made a beeline for the fish tank to save Fritz, but he realized there was nothing he could do without a net. He looked around wildly. Where was the net that he used to remove Fritz when he had to clean the fish tank? Mutt started opening Rory's desk drawers, and then he snapped his fingers. Rory had taken the thing into the bathroom. He had been playing with it in the tub. Mutt tore out of Rory's room. He reached down the hall to the bathroom. Yep, there was the net, sitting on the side of the tub. Grabbing it, Mutt ran back into Rory's room. He charged over to the fish tank. As Mutt reached for the tank's lid, he froze. The sea bunnies were nowhere near Fritz. They were swimming around in the tank, acting like, well, acting like normal sea bunnies, and Fritz was swimming around by himself. He looked just fine. Had Mott imagined what he'd seen? Mott leaned closer to be sure Fritz was okay. He appeared to be... Mott blinked and frowned. Fritz was not okay. Fritz was different. He didn't appear to be orange anymore. What had the sea bunnies done to him? Ignoring his distaste for the sea bunnies, Mott went over to the tank to get a closer look at the goldfish. Up close, it was clear that not only was Fritz's color off, his shape was weird too. Now a faded blue, not unlike the color of the sea bunnies. Fritz was a little lumpy, as if he'd... No, hang on. He wasn't lumpy. Mott gasped, but he couldn't pull himself away from the tank. He had to see. He leaned closer, putting his face almost up to the glass. Fritz was drifting lazily through a cluster of sea bunnies toward the back of the tank. Mott had to wait until Fritz turned to circle toward the front of the tank. He remained still, almost holding his breath, as the no longer goldfish came his way. As soon as Fritz swam toward the front wall of the tank, Mott's stomach turned. He covered his mouth as he stared at the fish. Mott had been right when he'd first seen it. Fritz wasn't just lumpy. Something was moving inside Fritz. No, not inside. Mott squinted at the fish as it swam past his gaze. Something was moving on the outside too. All of Fritz was in motion, as if... Oh, gross! Mott backed away from the tank, but he couldn't stop looking at Fritz. Not that Fritz was Fritz anymore. Fritz was no longer a goldfish. He no longer had fish scales and fins. No. Fritz was now a mass of squirming sea bunnies. All Fritz's own parts had been replaced with a tiny, gelatinous, deformed aquatic rabbits. Mott stared in disbelief and total disgust. As he gaped, he saw a couple of Fritz's scales drifting toward the bottom of the tank. They slowly floated downward until they settled on the rocks. Mott stared at the tiny scales. They were all that was left of the original Fritz. Mott felt like he was going to be sick. Fritz swam behind a cluster of sea bunnies, and Mott swallowed bile. He made a face and started to turn toward the door, but movement in the tank caught his attention. He glanced back. All the sea bunnies were lined up against the glass, staring at him. Mott ran from Rory's room. Mott spent most of the night and the better part of the next day thinking about Fritz. Or actually, not Fritz. All this thinking time wasn't technically needed because he'd reached a conclusion about the body-snatched fish within an hour of leaving Rory's room. Lying on his back on his bed, he'd forced himself to think about what he'd seen. After analyzing it from every angle he could think of, he decided what he'd seen was not some new version of Fritz, formed out of sea bunnies. It was, instead, a Fritz imposter. It was a mass of sea bunnies formed to look like Fritz. Why? Because the sea bunnies had consumed Fritz, then used what they'd ingested to multiply themselves and take Fritz's place. Mott had decided they were kind of like flesh-eating nanobots, which then took on the form of the thing they'd eaten. The day after Mott saw not Fritz for the first time, the day was bright and relentlessly sunny. The weather was all wrong for his mood. He thought a stormy day would have better suited his dark thoughts. But no matter. His thoughts weren't distracted by the sunshine. By the time Mott got home from school, he reached a conclusion. The sea bunnies had to go. Unfortunately, he came to this conclusion too late in the day. If he'd worked this out earlier, he could have cut school to come home and flush the nasty things. But now Rory was home, and Mott was going to have to figure out a way to get Rory out of his room. No, out of the house, so Mott could dispose of the sea bunnies. Rory now sat at the kitchen counter, eating his after-school snack of crackers, cheese, and orange juice. Mott leaned against the counter by the sink and watched his brother shower crumbs all over his blue shirt and the floor. "How about we go outside and toss the ball around?" Mott said. It's a nice day. Everyone should be outside.
Okay, Rory shouted. I'll go get my mitts. Shoving his last 2 crackers into his mouth and trailing crumbs behind him, he scurried out of the kitchen. Once they were outside, Mott started working on a plan to keep Rory out of the house, while Mott went back inside and disposed of the sea bunnies. Mott had plenty of time to work on his plan because neither he nor Rory were particularly good at throwing or catching. A lot of time was spent running around their big backyard, chasing the ball. Mott's house sat on a large lot which backed up on a greenbelt. A thick forest of old oak and maple trees hugged the fence line, and gnarled branches reached into the yard to drop leaves. Uneven grass covered most of the yard. It used to be thick green grass, but when Mott's dad started taking longer flights, which kept him away longer, he stopped doing things like fertilizing and trimming. Moles started burrowing under the lawn, and the yard turned lumpy. Sort of like not Fritz. Mott squinted up at the sun, which was starting to slide toward the horizon. He needed an excuse soon to keep Rory outside. Hi, Rory,
a child's voice called from the other side of the wooden fence at the north end of the yard.
Hey, Danny,
Rory called back. He'd been running after the ball, but he abandoned that task and veered toward the wood slats that separated Rory's domain from Danny's.
Wanna come play ball?
Rory shouted. He put his face up to one of the weathered fence boards and peered through a knothole.
No,
Danny called.
Mom and I are taking Dap up for his first walk on a leash. Wanna come? Yeah!
Rory shouted. He turned to look at Mott.
Can we?
He yelled. He did a typical Rory spastic dance of excitement. Mott grinned. This was perfect. He nodded. You go ahead. I'll stay here and get started on my homework, so I'll have more time to play with you later.
Cool!
Rory shouted. He dropped his mitt and ran toward the gate.
I'll keep an eye on them,
Danny's mother called through the fence. Thanks, Mrs. Fairchild. Mott charged back into the house as soon as Rory slammed the gate shut and started shouting.
What's up, Dap-Hap?
Mott had a feeling a walk that included a puppy and 2 antsy boys wasn't going to be a long one. He needed to hurry. He took the stairs 2 at a time and ran down the hall to Rory's room. Rory's door was open. It always was during the day. Inside the room, Mott went directly to Rory's desk, shoved aside a pile of books, and reached for the fish tank. The sound of splashing water stopped him. He looked in the tank. Its lid was up, probably because Rory had forgotten to close it after he fed his little maniacal creatures. Mott could see both through the glass and from above the water that the sea bunnies were spun up, violently darting this way and that, creating swells under the water and rough waves on the top. It was if they knew what he planned to do. Yeah, well, so what? He wasn't going to have to be worried about what they knew and didn't know soon enough. Mott drove to the desk, reached out, and slapped the fish tank lid closed. The water inside the tank shined more wildly. The lid vibrated, like it was going to pop open. Mott smacked his hand down on top of it, then used his other hand to put a book on the lid. He looked around and grabbed one of Rory's t-shirts off the floor, covering the tank with the shirt, because he sure didn't want to look at the sea bunnies as he carried them to their deaths. He pulled the tank toward him and lifted it off the desk. The sound of frothing water got louder. He ignored it. The fish tank was a lot heavier than he expected it to be, but he was strong enough to carry it, barely. From this point, he had to go slowly. He walked methodically and steadily toward the bathroom, and when he got there, he set the fish tank on the counter. He flipped on the light and closed the bathroom door. The toilet seat lid opened with a squeak. Mott turned toward the fish tank. He had to take the t-shirt and the book off the tank now. He wished he had rubber gloves. He didn't want a single drop of the water in the fish tank to touch him. Well, he just had to be careful. Mott took off the fish tank's lid, inspected it, but errant sea bunnies, found none, and set it aside. Then he ever so carefully began pouring the fish tank's water and the sea bunnies into the toilet bowl. He half expected to hear whispering as he poured. Would the sea bunnies beg for their lives? Would they try to make him feel guilty or murderous? He heard nothing. Maybe they were in shock. It was a good thing they didn't try to make him feel bad, because he felt no regret. What he felt was relief. Deep and profound relief. He couldn't empty the entire fish tank into the toilet bowl at once, so he started by pouring as much of the water out as he could. While he poured, he flushed. Once he had most of the water gone, he was able to flush the bulk of the sea bunnies together. Then it took one last spill to dump the last of the sea bunnies and pull Not Fritz into the toilet. He watched the remaining sea bunnies and Not Fritz whirl around the toilet bowl, and as soon as they disappeared and clear water refilled the bowl, he did a fist pump. "Yes!" he shouted. He looked inside the fish tank to be sure all the sea bunnies were gone. They weren't. One purplish creature was flopping around on the bottom of the tank. Mott quickly held the fish tank under the bathtub faucet. He let about an inch of water run into the tank, and he switched it around. Then he dumped the water too. He flushed again. Checked the fish tank. No sea bunnies. Moving fast again, Mott grabbed a roll of paper towels from under the sink. He also ran down to the kitchen to get his mom's big stock pot. It had occurred to him while he was watching the sea bunnies head off to their sewery grave that he should have a plausible story for why he'd flushed his brother's friends. He'd quickly come up with one. He was going to make it look like he'd been trying to clean the tank, and, while he transferred them to the pot, they died. Perhaps poisoned by the stainless steel? That should work. Rory wouldn't know any better. His mom probably wouldn't either, and she wouldn't care much. She had other things to think about. Even if Rory pitched a fit and went running to his mummy, his mum wouldn't suspect Mott of deliberately disposing of the sea bunnies. She just soothed Rory's hurt feelings, and that would be that. Which was almost what happened. The only part of the scenario that didn't play out according to Matt's plan was Rory's reaction. Rory didn't pitch a fit. He didn't throw a tantrum. He didn't go running to his mummy. Instead, he burst into tears, ran into his room, slammed the door, and locked it. Okay, so maybe Mott felt a little bad. He loved his brother, and he didn't want to upset the little guy. Had there been some other way to handle the situation? Mott stood outside his brother's door, asking himself this question as he tried to get Rory to come downstairs for dinner. "I'm really sorry, buddy," he called through the closed door. "I was only trying to help." This much was true. He'd been trying to help himself be free of the sea bunnies for sure. But he also didn't like them being in the same room as his little brother. After all, the loathsome things did shout down on Fritz. They might be dangerous. What if they bit Rory and gave him an infection? "Mom wants you to come down to dinner," Mott called through the closed door. "Go away!" Rory yelled. "I'm not here!" Okay," Mott said. "Then who's yelling at me?" "Not me!" Rory shouted. A chill skated down Mott's spine. "Not me" was way too close to "not Fritz." The image of a sea bunny-infested Rory flashed through Mott's mind. He shuddered and stepped back from the door. "Suit yourself," he called. Mott fell into bed just before 10 o'clock p.m., exhausted. Not only had he slept very little the night before, he tapped out his energy with all the thinking he'd done during the day, the adrenaline rush of vanquishing his enemies, and the struggle to get Rory to open his bedroom door. The latter part of Mott's tough day had stretched through the evening. Neither his nor his mom's powers of persuasion had been enough to get Rory to open his door. Eventually, it was Rory's need to pee that got his door open. When he finally came out and emptied his bladder, he made 2 announcements. To his mom, he announced, "I'm hungry." "I bet you are," she said. "That's what happens when you refuse to open your door." She pulled him close. "Why don't you come and climb in bed with me, and you can explain to me why you did what you did, and I can explain to you
why you don't get to do it anymore. If we're both satisfied at the end of the conversation, I'll fix you a snack. Deal?
Rory wiped red eyes and nodded. He then turned to Mott and announced,
You're not my brother. Rory!
His mum admonished. It's okay, Mum, Mott said. I get it. To Rory, he said, I really am sorry. That was only part of a lie. He wasn't sorry he'd flushed the sea bunnies, but he was sorry that Rory was upset. Now Mott lay in the silent house and wondered if Rory had fallen asleep. Rory had still been crying when their mum put him to bed. The house creaked, and outside an owl hooted. Mott turned on his side and looked at his curtain-covered window. His window looked out over the green belt behind the house, and it was right over the roof that covered the back deck. In the summer, he liked to climb out onto that roof and sit in the sun, watching the birds in the trees. It was so peaceful. Mott closed his eyes. He realized he was relaxed for the first time since he'd seen the sea bunnies in Rory's tank. He'd exhaled and went to sleep. As soon as he did, he dropped into a dream. Mott sat at the breakfast table, eating his cornflakes and reading the last of his English literature assignment. Shoveling in his food, keeping his eye on the pages of his book. He spooned up milk and flakes over and over. As he neared the bottom of the bowl, though, he shifted his gaze from the book to the cereal. And that's when he saw them. Instead of seeing flakes floating in his milk, Mott saw sea bunnies swimming in formation around his bowl. Their squidgy bluish bodies disgustingly pulsing through the milk. The sea bunnies flipped over and looked up at him with itty-bitty black beady eyes. Mott yelled, gagged, and shoved the bowl away from him. No! Mott's yell followed him out of his dream and into his waking state. He thrashed free of his covers and sat up. The hair in his arms was sticking out, and his heart was pounding hard and fast and loud in his chest. He felt a dry heave come up. He swallowed it down. He started to retch, and he sprang out of his bed and rushed to the bathroom. Afraid his cry might have pulled his mom from a deep sleep, Mott didn't turn on the bathroom light. He didn't want it to worry. He groped in the dark for the glass he knew was next to the sink, ran tap water into the glass, and started chugging it down. Halfway through the glass, the water going down Mott's throat suddenly felt clumpy, like it had thickened or it suddenly had something in it, like a glob of noodles in a bowl of chicken soup. Choking and sputtering, he dropped the glass as he reached for the light. The light came on just as the glass landed in the sink and cracked. Mott quickly shut the bathroom door and scooped up the glass to examine it closely. Holding the glass up to the light, he inspected the water droplets caught on the inside curve. Was anything swimming in the drops? He also studied the crack. Was anything caught in it? He saw nothing but water. Sitting on the closed toilet seat, he thought about what he'd felt in his throat. Had he really felt something, or had he just swallowed wrong? Maybe there had been some toothpaste in the glass, or maybe his mind had conjured up the sensation because of his dream. Given what he'd done that day, it was easy to assume he'd imagined feeling something slimy slip down his throat. As freaked out as he was by the sea bunnies, it was surprising he could even think about drinking water. Mott picked up the cracked glass and looked at it again. Nope. Still nothing. Mott blew out a sigh and headed back into his room. When he opened his eyes the next morning, Mott's logic faced its first foe. His stomach was cramping so badly he could barely get out of bed and go to the bathroom to pee. And when he was done with that, it was all he could do to get back into the bed, curl onto his side, clutch his stomach, and moan. That's why his mother found him when she came in to be sure he was up.
Rise and shine,
she called out.
It's a... Matt?
She rushed to the side of the bed.
What's wrong?
She felt his forehead. Mott hesitated. I'm not sure. I have stomach cramps, like big ones. I must have eaten something bad last night. His mum frowned at him.
What did you eat that we didn't eat?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Mott thought. All I had yesterday was what you made me for lunch and what we had for dinner. As far as food went, that was the truth. He wasn't about to tell her about thinking he'd swallowed a sea bonnie. That opened a can of worms, or sea bonnies, he didn't want to get into.
I'll go get something for your stomach, his mom said, and I'll check on Rory to be sure he's okay. Maybe he's sick too, and that's why he was so upset about his sea bonnies last night.
Mutt opened his mouth to respond, but another wave of cramping gripped his intestines, and right on the heels of that, the whispers returned. Wuss, the little whispers flung at him. Can't handle swallowing just one? What do you think 100 would feel like? 200? 2,000? The whispers morphed into what sounded like hushed giggles, thousands of them. Mutt closed his eyes and pressed his lips together.
I'll be right back,
his mum said. He heard his mum's footfalls tap across the floor. She was already dressed for work, wearing her high heels. She must have an event today, and he was making trouble for her. Mutt tried to concentrate on his breathing, but between the cramping and the whispers, he couldn't stay focused on it. He couldn't decide which was worse, the horrible cramping or the eerie and relentless whispers. Serves you right, the whispers were saying now. Every bad deed gets punished. Mutt's mum reappeared with choking medicine she always gave him when his stomach was upset.
Rory's fine,
she said, pouring Matt a dose. He swallowed it dutifully.
But he had a peanut butter sandwich yesterday, his mum said. I gave her the rest of the lunch meat. It must have gone bad. I am so sorry, honey.
It's not your fault, Mom, he said, absolutely meaning it. He had no doubt whatsoever that the way he felt had nothing to do with the bad lunch meat. It had to do with what had gone down his throat last night. He was sure of it. Convincing himself he swallowed Rory's toothpaste had been wishful thinking. You're not as stupid as you look, the whispering voices said. Mutt looked up at his mom. I think I just need to go back to sleep. Maybe when I wake up, I'll feel better. He was lying now, to both himself and his mum.
Are you sure I could...
She chewed on her lower lip.
Have someone else run the event?
No, Mum. You don't need to do that. I'll be fine. She felt his forehead again.
You're not hot. In fact, you're kind of on the cool side. Chocolate milk!
Rory shouted from the hallway.
I want chocolate milk for breakfast!
Mutt cringed at the volume. He gave his mum a half smile.
Well, apparently he's gotten over his upset.
Good, Mutt said.
Mom!
Rory yelled.
I'm coming,
she called. She looked at Mutt one more time.
You're sure you...
I'll be fine, he lied again. He wasn't at all sure he was going to be fine. The cramps were starting to feel more intense, and the voices were getting more insistent. The whispering wasn't a unison murmur anymore. It was more like the garbled hissing of hundreds of voices, all muttering at once. He could no longer make out whole phrases, but he caught a word here and there. Stupid was used frequently. He also had guilty and murderer a few times. Once, he was sure he heard milksop.
Did you hear me?
His mom asked. What? Mutt curled up tighter as a new spasm clutched at his belly.
I said that if you don't feel better when you wake up, be sure to call Ron. I'm going to get on the phone with him before I leave and tell him you might be needing him.
Ron was Dr. T. That was actually a good idea. Mutt said so, and then he closed his mouth on the groan that wanted to erupt into the room. In the hallway, Rory shouted,
I'm starving!
His mum leaned over and kissed Mutt on the forehead.
Sleep, honey. You'll feel better soon.
She crossed to the door, gave him one last look, and left the room. He heard her talking softly to Rory in the hallway. Then he heard Rory's footsteps pounding down the stairs, and his mum's tapping heels after that. Mutt closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Tried being the operative word. When Mutt looked at his bedside digital clock, for the 761st time. Okay, maybe he hadn't looked quite that many times, but close. At 1:37 in the afternoon, precisely, he gave up trying to convince himself he was going to feel better soon. It just wasn't going to happen. At 1:38, he got up and went into the bathroom. He thought maybe if he could use the toilet, he'd feel better. 5 minutes later, he was back in his bedroom, and he wasn't feeling better. Moaning, he changed into sweats, a t-shirt, and some athletic shoes. He called at Dr. T's clinic. Claudia, Dr. T's receptionist, answered. Mott could picture her holding the phone as they spoke. Large and cushy, with wildly curly hair and kind hazel eyes, Claudia was a caring woman Mott had known as long as he'd known Dr. T. She immediately put Dr. T on the phone. "Can you get over here on your own?" Dr. T asked. "I think I can bike over." Mott struggled to get out. His hesitations weren't entirely caused by stomach cramps. The whispers were getting louder, and they were as distracting as all get out. What he was hearing sounded kind of like someone quickly scanning the radio stations. However, he was hearing snatches of words and phrases instead of snatches of songs. None of them were anything he wanted to listen to. "In about 15 minutes, Dr. T said. "I'm sorry? What?" "I said your voice and your hesitations aren't giving me a lot of confidence in your biking abilities. Claudia's going on her lunch break, and she said she'll swing over to get you. She'll be there in 15 minutes. "Oh, I don't want to—" "Don't argue with your doctor," Dr. T said. He chuckled. Mott sighed. "Thank you." One of the voices whispered, "Sucker." Dr. T had exam rooms designed to please the various age groups he focused on. He had some for the little kids, the grade school kids, and the teens. Unfortunately, because Dr. T was squeezing in Mott between other patients, Mott landed in a little good room. So, when he lay on his back, he was staring up at a ceiling painted with sparkly rainbows, flying purple pigs, and a blue-tinged Pegasus that at the moment resembled a sea bunny far more than it should have. It must have been the wings, which looked vaguely like bunny ears, and that purplish blue color. He never really wanted to see that color again. Mott quickly looked away from the ceiling, turning his head to gaze at the room's walls. They were painted yellow and covered with animal stencils. Pretty much every imaginable animal had a spot in the room, including a rabbit, which Mott could have sworn was staring at him with animosity. Mott closed his eyes. The paper beneath him crinkled as he shifted to find a semi-comfortable position, while Dr. T prodded his belly. Every time Dr. T asked, "Does this hurt?" Mott gasped, "Yes." Dr. T stepped back and sat on his rolling stool. Mott heard the vinyl squeak and the rollers rattle as Dr. T scooted over to the laptop he set up at a small counter next to the exam table. Dr. T was kind of a funny-looking guy. This was mostly caused by his big ears and his equally large nose, but a goatee that came to a point under his chin contributed too. On top of those eye-catching features, he was short and totally bald. When Mott and Nate were 10, Dr. T had shaved what little remained of his light brown hair. He looked a bit like one of the 7 dwarfs, or maybe a gnome. He might have been one of the nicest people Mott had ever met, though even nicer than Mott's mum. His mum occasionally lost her temper. Dr. T never did. Mott tried to concentrate on how nice Dr. T was, but the whispered voices got louder. He was now hearing more full sentences. "You don't know what you're dealing with," for example, came through clearly. Mott tried to keep his breathing steady while he watched Dr. T type. He felt sweat trickle down between his shoulder blades, and he squirmed. He was attempting to stay calm, but these cramps and the relentless whispers were terrifying. What was happening inside his body? Mott abruptly rose up on an elbow. He glanced at his belly and he frowned. Did his belly look lumpy? He thought it did. "Okay," Dr. T said. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to get Louise in here to draw some blood. The blood tests will tell me if you have an infection. When she's done with that, Louise will also do an ultrasound. That will tell me if we're looking at a gallbladder issue, which is a possibility." Mott nodded. He didn't bother to ask questions about his gallbladder. He pointed at his belly. "Do you think my stomach looks lumpy? I think it looks lumpy." Dr. T stood and looked down at Mott's stomach. "It looks normal to me, and I didn't feel any masses." Mott frowned. "Okay." Dr. T patted Mott's thigh. "When you feel like crap, it's easy for the mind to start imagining all kinds of worst-case scenarios. So, let's start our treatment right away, even when we get the test set up." "What treatment?" Dr. T flipped his computer screen, turning it into a tablet. He tapped the screen and handed it to Mott. "Watch this. Louis will be here in a few minutes to draw blood and do the ultrasound." Dr. T pressed the button, and the upper part of the table Mott lay on raised a little. "That work?" Mott nodded. He took the tablet. Dr. T patted his leg again. "I'll be back after I look at your tests. In the meantime," he pointed at the tablet screen Mott held. "Watch that." Dr. T strode from the room, closing the door behind him. Mott, cringing at another round of cramping, looked at the screen. It was frozen on a video of a stand-up comic routine. He managed a half-smile and shook his head. Leave it to Dr. T to prescribe laughter. Maybe the laughter helped. Mott had been tempted to set aside Dr. T's tablet and just be miserable while he waited for Louis. But 2 more intense cramps and a whispered, "Your time is coming," got him to hit play on the screen. He hadn't heard of the comedian in the video, but he was really funny. Mott managed to chuckle at first, and then he was actually laughing so hard that Louise, a small dark-haired woman in a ponytail, had to pause the video while she took blood. She let him watch again while she did the ultrasound, which she did silently. After a few minutes of feeling her pressing her magic wand, as she called it, all over her stomach, Mott asked, "Do you see anything?" "I don't, kiddo," she said. "But we'll have Dr. T come in and give a look-see to be sure." The look-see came quickly. Dr. T studied the scan and grinned at Mott. "Everything looks normal." "Really?" Mott frowned. "Then why do I feel so bad?" "Honestly, I'm not 100% sure, but my guess is you have food poisoning. I'll know more when I get your blood work, but nothing horrible is going on." Mott nodded. "Okay." Dr. T squeezed his shoulder. "Your enthusiasm is overwhelming," he chuckled. "How about this? Why don't you get dressed and go hang out on the sofa in my office? I have a couple more patients to see. Then I'm heading home. I'll give you a ride." Mott nodded again. When Dr. T and Louise left the room, Mott sat up on the edge of the exam table and took in what Dr. T had said. He tried believing it. "You're fine," he told himself out loud. "Liar, liar, pants on fire," the whispers counted. Mott shook his head and stood up to get dressed. "You're not real," he said to the whispers. "I'm fine." Although he could have sworn that he had sibilant laughter in his head, Mott ignored it and got dressed. Strangely, the cramping had abated a little. Maybe it was the laughter, but it was more likely the power of suggestion. He was comforted by the results of the ultrasound. If something foreign had been in his belly, the scan would have found it. Right? Right. Mott was able to walk semi-normally down the clinic's hallway. Behind the purple and white striped door of exam room 2, near Dr. T's office, a little girl giggled. Mott smiled.
It was a nice sound, much nicer than the poisonous murmurs in his head. He pushed open the door of Dr. T's office and dropped onto Dr. T's overstuffed blue and yellow polka dot couch. Listening to the continued giggling, he fell asleep. He woke only long enough for Dr. T to walk him out to Dr. T's new SUV and get him home. Then he went up to his bed and he fell back asleep. When Mott woke up, it was dark, but the dark wasn't nighttime dark. It was pre-dawn dark. He sat up. He'd slept for over 12 hours. Taking stock, he realized he felt okay. His stomach was sore, but he wasn't cramping like before. The whispers were still in his head, but they seemed muted. Fumbling for his small bedside lamp, Mott switched it on. As soon as the light poured onto his nightstand, he saw a bottle of water, several crackers in a plastic bag, and a note. He picked up the note. Mott, you were sleeping soundly, and Ron said that was the best thing for you, so I didn't wake you. I've left you some crackers in case you wake up hungry. If you need me, come and get me. I love you. Mom. Mott smiled and reached for the bottled water. He was really thirsty, so he quickly unscrewed the lid. He started to bring the bottle to his lips, but then he stopped. He held the bottle under the glow of his lamp, and he studied it. He rolled his eyes. It was just water. Bottled water in a sealed container. It was fine. He drank some water, and he reached for the crackers. Leaning back on his pillows, he opened the plastic bag and plucked out a whole wheat cracker. Munching on it, he looked around his semi-dark room, at the nature posters and photos of his favorite baseball stadiums, at the shelves full of video games and math puzzle books, at the closet he knew was stuffed with his clothes and hiking and fishing gear. He took comfort in being reminded of who he was. He wasn't Mott, a boy infested by sea bunnies. He was Mott, lover of baseball and video games and math and camping out, best friend to Nate and Lyle, a good brother to Rory, and maybe soon-to-be boyfriend to Teresa. He was a normal teen. You're a freak, the whispers counted. Yeah, and you're not real, he told them. In the light of this new day, it felt even more true. He shook his head. Sea bunnies couldn't even hatch without purified water above 75 degrees. How were they going to survive this stomach acid? He chuckled as he kept munching on crackers and looking around his room. Over Mott's desk, opposite his bed, he had a dark green bulletin board covered in photos. The photos represented his favorite things and best memories. The one in the middle was a picture of him and his dad sitting in a rowboat in the middle of the lake where his family had a summer cabin. His dad always got a couple weeks off in July, and then went to the cabin to swim and hike and fish. Mott usually felt disconnected from his dad, but when they fished, he felt close to fish. Mott dropped his half-eaten cracker and sat up. His reminiscing had reminded him of Fritz, the fish that was no longer a fish when Mott flushed it down the toilet with the sea bunnies. He hadn't imagined the way not Fritz had looked when Mott had last seen him. He might have been imagining the whispers, but he'd seen what he'd seen. Fritz had been eaten from the inside out and replaced by sea bunnies. He was pretty sure fish had stomach acid too, and yet the sea bunnies had still managed to get him. Mott looked down at his belly. Setting aside the plate, he raised his shirt with a trembling hand. He put his palm against his skin. It was normal, wasn't it? Mott thought about how horrible he'd felt the day before, and how he felt now. He'd assumed the end of his cramps was a good thing. But what if all that meant was that the sea bunnies had finished their work on his stomach? Maybe he felt better because his belly was no longer being consumed. It was now something else. His not belly. Mott gingerly felt all over his stomach. Did it feel different than it used to? More gelatinous,
Mott groaned and swept the bag of crackers off his lap. They hit the floor with a muffled crunch, and Mott slid all the way under his covers, pulling them up over his head. He wanted to escape, to hide from the world. No, what he wanted was to hide from the sea bunnies, and from himself. "You can't hide," the whispers told him. "Yeah," Mott said. "Watch me." Mott covered his ears and started humming. That's where his mum found him, under his covers, humming like a little kid. When she came into his room, still in her robe, to check on him. "Mott?" He threw back the covers and looked at her. Apparently, he looked worse than he felt. As soon as her gaze landed on his face, she frowned and said, "You're staying home again today." He didn't argue with her. After his mom and Rory left the house, Mott dropped back into sleep, but he didn't stay asleep for long. This was unfortunate, because as soon as he was awake, his mind was inundated by the whispers again. The whispers in Mott's head, however, were no longer whispers. They were full-on shouts. If he didn't drown them out, he was going to lose his mind. Mott threw back his covers and dashed to his desk to get his earbuds. Putting them in, he started filling his ears with driving rock music. He could still hear the shouts. What could he do? He looked around. His gaze landed on his shelves. He reached out and picked up one of his handheld video games. He got back under the covers and he turned on the game. Mott spent the better part of the day trying to drown out the shouts, but not even deafening rock music and fast-moving video games could beat them down. Then, sometime during the afternoon, maybe a little after 2:00 p.m., Mott started feeling odd. When he stopped his game to figure out why he felt that way, he realized he had a strange vibration in his chest and belly. It was like the very faintest suggestion of movement, as if something was shaking his organs from the inside. He felt like his heart was quivering, and his lungs felt curiously unstable every time he took a breath. Like instead of expanding and contracting, they kind of wiggled, struggling not to collapse. He couldn't stand this anymore. He had to get another scan. Mott picked up the phone and called Dr. T's cell phone. He didn't want to go through Claudia. "Hello, this is Dr. Tabor." Mott gripped the phone. "Dr. T, this is Mott." "Hey, Mott. How are you feeling this morning?" That's the thing. I still feel weird." "Still cramping?" "Not so much cramping as, like shaking on the inside. Like my organs are, trembling." For 4 seconds, Mott counted. The only thing he heard through the phone was the faintest of hisses on the line. Then Dr. T said, "Let's do this. I'm on my way over to the hospital to visit a couple patients before I head home for a while. I need to go back in late tonight to work on inventory with Claudia, so I'm leaving the clinic early. Why don't I stop by and get you? We'll see if we can squeeze you in for a CAT scan. Shouldn't be a problem. Given what you're telling me, I can get insurance approval for it. Do you want me to talk to your mum before I come over?" "I'll do it," Mott said quickly. He didn't want to worry his mother. Dr. T was quiet for another few seconds. "Okay, I'll talk to her later, after the scan." "That will be good." As soon as he hung up the phone, Mott scribbled a note for his mum on the back of the note she'd left for him, just in case she got home before he did. The note was filled with lies, but the truth was out of the question. What was he supposed to write? "Mum, I've got to get a scanner to see if sea bunnies are eating me from the inside out." No, that wouldn't be a good idea. He settled with an evasive lie. "Mum, I'm feeling better. Going out to get some fresh air. We'll call later. Love you, Mott." Mott sat in front of Dr. T's small oak desk in his clinic's office. Dr. T was on the phone talking to another doctor, one who had analyzed the CAT scan. Mott wasn't listening to what Dr. T was saying. He didn't really care at this point. He'd already had enough from Dr. T himself. Now he was just trying to stay calm. So he was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, and he was staring at his shoes. There was a brown speck on one of his white athletic shoes. He was using it as a focal point, concentrating on it the way a seasoned meditator might stare at a candle. He wondered if he should try a mantra or maybe an om. He needed something to tether him to sanity, because the facts were dragging him quickly toward madness. Apparently the scan had revealed abnormalities in Mott's stomach, intestines, lungs, and heart. They looked variegated in a way that was inconsistent with normal tissue. Dr. T and the other doctor were now discussing potential causes of the abnormalities. Were they tumors? Were they evidence of some sort of systemic infection? No and no. The doctors knew of no biological cause that could be responsible for the scan's results. Mott didn't care about the discussion because he already knew what had caused the variegated appearance of his organs. He'd seen it as soon as Dr. T had shown Mott his scan. "Here's what the CAT scan revealed," Dr. T had said, tapping a few keys on his laptop to bring up the images of Mott's scan. Dr. T had pointed to light-colored clumps clustered together all through Mott's intestines, his stomach, his lungs, and his heart. The clumps were grayish-white, and they had small dark specks sprinkled throughout. At first glance, the specks appeared to be random, but when Mott had leaned closer to Dr. T's computer screen, it was obvious the specks weren't haphazard. No, the specks came in pairs, and they weren't specks. They were eyes. If you really studied the clumps, you could see they were made up of elongated forms, each vaguely rabbit-shaped, each with two dark dots. Mott had almost thrown up when he'd seen the truth of what was going on inside him. But for some reason, he hadn't been able to. He'd gagged, but nothing had come up. Dr. T hung up the phone, stapled his fingers, and looked at Mott across the desk. "Dr. Jenkins and I agree that the scan's anomalies don't fit anything seen before. That's a good thing. It means that the scan's results are likely caused by an issue with the scan itself, interference with the machine. He suggested we repeat the scan tomorrow morning, and I think that's a good idea." Mott tore his gaze away from the brown spot on his shoe. He looked at Dr. T, ignoring the rippling sensation that he felt in his chest. He said, "We don't need to repeat the scan. I know what it is." He was shocked by how calm he sounded. His words were totally flat. Too flat, actually. He sounded a little like a robot, but that was just because he was too stunned to bother with putting inflection in his words. Dr. T frowned at Mott. "What do you think it is, Mott? Is there something you haven't told me?" Mott figured Dr. T thought Mott had taken something he shouldn't have taken. In a way, he had, but not on purpose. Mott shook his head. "No, I mean, yes, but that's not what you think." Dr. T raised his eyebrows and waited. "The thing is," Mott said, scooting forward in his seat, "a few days ago, Rory got some sea bonnies from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria." Dr. T frowned a question. "They're kind of like sea monkeys," Mott said. "You know, those brine shrimp things?" Dr. T nodded. "A couple of days after they hatched," Mott continued, "I noticed that Fritz, Rory's goldfish, which had a tank with the sea bunnies, didn't look right. When I really looked at him closely, I saw that he was no longer a goldfish. It was like the sea bunnies had eaten him from the inside out, infested him." Mott could tell from Dr. T's blank expression that Mott was losing him. When Dr. T opened his mouth to speak, Mott started talking faster, almost running his words together the same way Rory did when he got excited. "That's what made me realize I had to get rid of the things, which I did. I flushed them, and Rory was all upset. But later that night, I got a drink of water, and I felt something go down my throat, and I tried to convince myself it wasn't a sea bunny, but now I think it was. And I think it started eating my tissue, and it multiplied, and now my insides are turning into sea bunnies, the same way Fritz turned into sea bunnies. They're eating me from the inside, and they're coming together to replace my organs. I think that's why I feel so weird on the inside, like I'm jiggling from within, like guilt and sort of, but not exactly. Mort stopped talking. He concentrated on breathing in and out, which for obvious reasons was becoming harder than usual. He tried not to think about masses of sea bunnies whirling around together to form the walls of his lungs. Dr. T took a deep breath. It's time to call your mum. Mort slumped in his chair. Several hours later, near midnight, Mort sat on the edge of his bed. Once again he was staring at the brown spot on his shoe. He'd been staring at his shoe for a long time, an abnormally long time. He was staring at it mostly because he didn't know what else to do. He stared at it through the better part of the evening, listening to Rory chatter at his mum, listening to his mum trying to get Rory to calm down and go to bed, listening to Rory finally settle into his room, listening to his mum's footsteps pause outside Mott's door and then continue on to her room. Obviously, she decided to deal with him in the morning. Outside, thunder rumbled. Finally, the weather suited the situation. When they'd left the clinic earlier in the evening, Mott had noticed the ozone smell in the air, and he turned his face up to the soft rain starting to fall. For an instant, it had soothed him. But just for an instant. A streak of jagged lightning on the horizon had brought him back to his intolerable reality. Nothing he was facing could be eased by a little bit of rain. Now the rain matched how Mott felt. It wasn't soft or soothing. It was angry and insistent. He couldn't hear it thumping on the roof, assaulting the house like thousands of jackhammers trying to drill through the shingles. When Mott's mum had brought him home and asked him to go up to his room, she'd followed him as far as his doorway. Then she'd said, in the strained voice she used when she was trying to remain calm, but wanted to scream hysterically, "Please stay here. We'll talk later." For hours, Mott had been thinking about what that talk would be like. How would he convince her he wasn't crazy? Did he even want to cry? Wouldn't it be better if he was crazy? When you weighed the pros and cons, crazy was definitely the preferred scenario. If he was crazy, the worst that could happen was that he might get put in a mental hospital for a while. Maybe he'd have to do group therapy, talk about his feelings, and eat yucky tapioca pudding. But he'd be Mott. He'd be Mott, made up of his own parts, a human, normal. The alternative to crazy was being not Mott, absolutely unable to forget what not Fritz had looked like. Mott knew that when the sea bunnies were done with him, if they were consuming him from the inside, Mott wouldn't be anything remotely resembling a human. And that meant Mott's life would be over. He wanted to convince himself he was going crazy. He really did. But the problem with that was the CAT scan. He wasn't the only person who'd seen something weird on the scan. Dr. T had seen it, and so had the other doctor. They hadn't seen sea bunnies, of course, because their minds didn't let them entertain something so absurd, something so outside the bounds of what science understood to be possible. But they had seen something. Mott wasn't imagining the physical changes in his body. That was a very worrying fact. Mott felt an itch on his forearm, and he idly scratched it. It still itched. He scratched harder. When the spot kept itching, he looked down at his arm, and there, where it itched, something moved just under his skin. Mott stood up so fast he got dizzy and immediately collapsed back onto the bed. He swallowed hard and stared at his arm. Yes, there. The faintest of elongated lumps was slithering under the surface of the skin. Mutt groaned. His whole forearm started to itch, and he scratched at it so hard that it broke the skin. In horror, he stared at the blood welling up. Flicking up through that blood, the tail of a sea bunny squirmed in the thick redness. His eyes nearly bugging out of his head, Mutt watched the sea bunny tail disappear as the sea bunny dove back down under his skin. If he could have sawed his arm off and thrown it away, he would have. His whole arm itched now, and you could see that the movement was all up and down his arm. Not only that, his skin was changing color. Right in front of his eyes, his skin was losing its normal pigment. It was becoming translucent, and it was turning a pale shade of purple blue. Mutt looked at his other arm. The same thing was happening to it. For several seconds, Mutt didn't move. Not at all. He wasn't even sure he was breathing. He became a statue, a frozen collection of mutating cells, overseen by a brain incapable of accepting the impossible transformation. Because this had to be impossible. He could not be sitting here watching sea bunnies eat his skin from underneath. He was not seeing them take bite after bite of his cells, ingesting and integrating what used to be part of him, and turning it into more of them. He was not being devoured and replaced by sea bunnies. This was not real. Maybe there was something wrong with his eyes. Maybe he was hallucinating. Suddenly able to move, as if released from some paralytic drug or an evil magic spell, Mutt jumped to his feet and ran to his dresser. Leaning over the top of it, pushing aside his deodorant and his hairbrush, he peered into his own eyes in the mirror. And he saw a sea bunny swim through the white surrounding his left iris. Then he saw two wind around the darker flecks of the brown in his right iris. Matt lost what was left of his grip on reality. He ran for his door, intending to flee the house. But he stopped when he heard his mother's voice in the hallway. He couldn't face her like this. What if he infected her? He needed to get back to Dr. T. Now that it was obvious what was happening to Mott, maybe Dr. T could help him. Dr. T had said he was going back to his clinic to work that night. Mott had to get to the clinic. Mutt whirled and raced to his window. Throwing it open, he popped the screen and climbed out into the night, onto the roof of the deck. Immediately the rain stung his skin and his eyes. He didn't care. He crawled quickly to the edge of the porch roof, and he bent over to grab the top of a downspout. Not concerned about cutting his hands, Mutt wrapped them around the metal and swung his legs over the edge of the roof. Grasping the gutter spout with his arms and legs, he slid down it like a fireman's pole, and it hit the ground hard. His ankle turned, and pain shot up his leg. But he ignored it. He also ignored the pain throbbing in his hands. Mutt looked out into the darkness extending behind his house. Why hadn't he brought a flashlight? Well, maybe because he was a little distracted by being eaten by sea bunnies. That was a reasonable excuse. Between the night and the rain coming down in almost solid walls of water, it was nearly impossible to see. That was okay. He knew his yard, and he knew the forest behind it. He'd find his way. He could have gone out to the sidewalk, where streetlights could show him the way, but he didn't want to be by the street. There were too many cars with bright headlight beams he didn't want to be caught in. So Mutt sloshed through the grass in his yard, and he scaled the fence at the back. He figured he could follow the green belt through his neighborhood. He knew if he stuck to the relatively narrow band of trees, they'd eventually lead him back to Dr. T's clinic. It was just a mile or so away. He could walk it. Mutt was so drenched by the time he reached the trees that his clothes clung to him like they were part of him. Or maybe they were part of the sea bunnies now. Light from the houses along the green belt reached into the forest. Enough so Mort could see that the ground was covered with standing water. Huge puddles had formed in the spongy loam under the old trees. The water was getting caught up in the depressions between vast root systems stretching through the underbrush. Mort ran through the puddles and stumbled over knobby roots, occasionally falling against a rough tree trunk. As he ran, he scratched at his arms, which still itched incessantly, intensely. He couldn't stop digging at himself. Not long after Mort left his house. He didn't know how long, because time was becoming something that made no sense to him. Mort scratched hard at his bicep, and when he pulled his hand away, he saw, in the yellow glow from someone's porch light, that he'd torn out a huge chunk of his own flesh. No, not his own flesh. When Mort looked at what he held in his hand, he recoiled, staggering back into the branches of an old oak tree. Instead of embracing him, the twigs prodded and speared him. But that didn't matter. Nothing mattered but the fact that Mort was holding a handful of madly swimming sea bunnies instead of the flesh he thought he'd pulled away from his arm. Sickened, Mort flung the swimming creatures to the ground. He started to hurry on, but he noticed the sea bunnies were swimming energetically, coming together in an organized school to follow the rivulets from one puddle to the next. He stopped and stared, then realized they were swimming after him. They were pursuing him. Mort took off. He started reeling through the trees, zigging this way and that, not just to avoid the trees, but to evade the sea bunnies coming after him. He wished he could hear them advancing, so he knew where they were. He knew better than to stop and turn to see them. They'd catch up if he did. But he couldn't hear them. Mort could hear nothing but the staccato rhythm of the rain and his own rapid breathing. He managed about 10 ungainly strides over the uneven ground before he tripped and went down onto one knee. As soon as he did, the sea bunnies were there. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them. They immediately swam up his jeans and found their way to his arms, where they reattached themselves. Mort could feel his body reabsorbing the wriggling creatures. He also realized he could feel the sea bunnies all through his body now. They were in every vein, every artery, every organ, every nerve, every system in his entire body. They were everywhere. Mort turned his face to the sky, and he screamed. He screamed out of fear, his disbelief, and his rage. He screamed at the insanity of it all. He screamed because what else could he do but scream? He didn't know how to fight this battle. He didn't understand it. He couldn't even believe it. He was also pretty sure he'd already lost it. But then again, maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe Dr. T could help him. Mort had to get to the clinic. Mort started running again, squinting to see through the rain and the trees. He wiped his eyes, but instead of clearing his vision, this just wiped away another glob of sea bunnies. He flicked it off his fingers, and in the glow from someone's pool lights, he could see it hit a tree branch. Immediately, the sea bunnies slithered down the trunk, found a new channel of water between two roots, and followed it back to Mort. He felt the sea bunny slip up his shin as he kept running. Finally, Mort reached the end of the green belt. He careened off one last tree, and he stepped out onto the rain-pounded sidewalk that led to the back door of the clinic. No, that wasn't right. He didn't actually step out. He flopped out. He couldn't step anywhere because he was constantly coming apart. With every motion he made, pieces of the flesh fell away and turned into a heaving swell of sea bunnies, which swam chaotically and then coalesced into a formation that once again sought their fellows. And they, of course, were in Mort. Not Mort. Mort wasn't Mort anymore, and he knew it. He tried to dismantle himself. He pulled at his cheek, at his ears, at his arms, at his chest, at his hips. He tore off handfuls of his flesh and tissue, throwing them aside. He realized some remote part of his brain, maybe a part not yet infested by sea bunnies, thought that if he could tear enough of himself away, he might unearth the few cells of Mott that were still Mott. But each time Mott discarded parts of himself, the parts became determined masses of sea bunnies that doggedly found a way back to him, reattaching and reassimilating faster each time he tried to toss them. They were now doing that so powerfully that Mott even had a sound when they came rushing back to him. It was a slap, kind of like sucking the last bit of milkshake up through a straw. But that description was too benign. The sea bunnies weren't benign. They were malevolent, through and through. All the sea bunnies wanted to do was vanquish every aspect of Mott. They wanted to vanquish him and conquer him. They wanted to be more than a colony. They wanted to be an empire formerly known as Mott. No matter what Mott did to resist them, the sea bunnies retaliated and resurged. They filled back in every hole created by his self-demolition efforts. When the chunks of flesh Mott lobbed away hit the ground, they immediately separated into swimming sea bunnies, which began returning to Mott. To get to him, they followed the standing water on the ground. They used the puddles. They even took advantage of falling raindrops. Any and all water became a conduit leading the sea bunnies back to Mott. Once they reached him, the sea bunnies sought any ingress they could find. They swam up his pant legs. They slithered around his shirt. They wriggled over his shoes. They returned to themselves and their version of Mott every single time. As Mott fought this battle, he managed to get around the outside of the clinic. He was now close to the front door, collapsing every few seconds as he attempted to extract parts of himself, only to have them reform immediately afterward. Mott realized he had very little time left. He realized his thoughts were not really thoughts anymore. They were fragments. He was having trouble thinking of the people he cared about. His mum, Rory, his friends, and Teresa. He tried to conjure images of them in his head, but he could only see pieces of them. Soon, he'd no longer be anything like what he used to be. How much time did he have? Maybe minutes, maybe seconds. Of the trillions of cells that had originally made up Mott, he figured only a few thousand were still as they'd been before the sea bunny invasion. Mott managed the last few feet to the clinic door. He reached for it, only to have his hand disintegrate in front of him and drop to the wet concrete. Claudia looked up from her computer screen, out through the darkened waiting room, to the blackness beyond the clinic's windows. The clinic was hushed and still, and perhaps because it was so quiet, in spite of the storm, she could hear something odd outside. It was kind of like a splashing sound, but not a normal rain spattering the ground sound. It was a bigger sound than that. It sounded like something large and squishy was falling into a body of water now and then. What Claudia heard between the splashes was odd, too. She heard a sort of suctioning sound, almost a whistling. This was similar to the weird noise her vacuum made whenever she accidentally sucked up something wet. After the third time she heard that sound, Claudia decided to look outside the clinic to see what might be causing the peculiar noises. Making sure her computer was secure, Claudia stood and walked through the hushed waiting room, hesitating for a couple seconds by the door. And not sure why, Claudia eventually pushed the heavy glass door open. She peered out into the deluge and saw Mott. Mott stood there as if standing in heavy rain was a perfectly normal thing to do. The rain sluiced over his brown hair, which was matted to his head. It ran down his face, and it patted against his clothing. Claudia wasn't sure what to make of this. She decided to act the same way Mott was acting, as if everything was normal.
Why, hello, Matt,
Claudia said. She kept her expression neutral. Claudia had known Matt since he was a baby. He was a nice boy, never a problem at the clinic. He'd been in yesterday, and this morning she knew. She didn't know why. Dr. T didn't discuss his patients with Claudia, even when the patient was almost part of the family. Mott didn't look particularly healthy, though. He had an unnatural bluish tint, and he was so pale he was almost see-through. When Mott didn't respond to her, Claudia asked,
"Are you okay?"
Suddenly Mott smiled. "Yes, it's a nice day. Everyone should be outside." Again, Claudia was a little nonplussed. She leaned forward to look in Mott's eyes. She was checking to see if his pupils looked okay. They did. She smiled at him. He smiled back. Then he turned and walked away into the rain. Claudia tried to see where he was going. She thought maybe she should call him back. But it was too late. The rain was coming down so relentlessly that once Mott was a few feet away, he seemed to disappear. And that is the end of Story 2. Thank you for listening to this read-through of Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Frights number 10, Story 2, Sea Bonnies. I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. If you did, please hit that like button. And if you're new to this channel, why not subscribe to get the next story of this read-through series? Also, make sure to click that bell icon so you'll be notified the next time I post a story. And I'll be back next time with the next story.